I'm Betsy Tomic. I'd like to recite the eighth principle and then describe one key word or phrase. I'm Betsy Tomic. I'd like to recite the eighth principle and then describe one key word or phrase. We, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other forms of oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. That's the eighth principle. Today's key phrase is journeying toward. Our denomination has a checkered history when it comes to the goals of multiculturalism and anti-racism. We currently recognize the inherent dignity of every person and are committed to justice. Endorsing the eighth principle seeks a commitment to undertake a dedicated journey toward achieving justice for all oppressions, starting with racism. Thank you.
We are called to gather in worship as a beloved community. We are called to set aside distractions and anxieties that we may touch deeper springs and be renewed. We are called to seek and to share comfort for the hurts that afflict. We are called to desire more love, more justice, and life more abundantly. We are called to truth, to mercy, to humility, and to courage. Let us answer the call with the yes of our lives. I invite you now to join in the spirit of meditation. You may wish to do so by sitting up straight in your chair, placing your feet flat on the floor to ground you to the earth, and slowly take in a nice deep breath and gently release it, releasing all of the stress of the week. Whether pilgrim or wayfarer, while seeking to be taught the truth or something else, the disciple learns only that there is nothing that anyone else can teach him. He learns, once he is willing to give up being taught, that he already knows how to live, that it is implied in his own tale. The secret is there is no secret. Everything is just what it seems to be. This is it. There are no hidden meanings. Before he is enlightened, a man gets up each morning to spend the day tending his fields, returns home to eat his supper, goes to bed, falls asleep. But once he has attained enlightenment, then a man gets up each morning to spend the day tending his fields, returns home to eat his supper, goes to bed, and falls asleep. The Zen way to see the truth is through your everyday eyes. It is only the heartless questioning of life as it is that ties a person in knots. Does not need an answer in order to find peace. He needs only to surrender to his existence, to cease the needless, empty questioning. The secret of enlightenment is when you are hungry, eat. When you are tired, sleep. The Zen master warns, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. This admonition points up that no meaning that comes from outside of ourselves is real. The Buddhahood of each of us has already been obtained. We need only recognize it. Philosophy, religion, patriotism are all empty idols. The only meaning in our lives is what we each bring to them. Killing the Buddha on the road means destroying the hope that anything outside of ourselves can be our master. No one is any bigger than anyone else. There are no mothers or fathers for grown-ups, only sisters and brothers. Let us join now in a moment of silent meditation.
Our reading this morning is Archetypes Defined by Robert Moore. Those of us who have been influenced by the thinking of the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung have great reason to hope that the external deficiencies we have encountered in the world as would-be men and women can be corrected. And we have not only hope, but actual experience as clinician and as individuals of inner resources not imagined by psychology before Jung. It is our experience that deep within every human are blueprints, what we also call hard wiring, for the calm and positive masculine nature. Jungians refer to these masculine potentials as archetypes or primordial images. Jung and his successors have found that on the level of the deep unconscious, the psyche of every person is grounded in what Jung called the collective unconscious, made up of instinctual patterns and energy configurations, probably inherited genetically throughout the generations of our species. These archetypes provide the very foundations of our behaviors, our thinking, our feeling, and our characteristic human reactions. They are the image makers that artists and poets and religious prophets are so close to. Jung related them directly to the instincts of other animals. Most of us are familiar with the fact that baby ducks, soon after they are hatched, attach themselves to whomever or whatever is walking by at the time. This phenomenon is called imprinting. It means that the newly hatched duckling is wired for mother or caretaker. It doesn't have to learn from the outside, as it were, what a caretaker is. The archetype for caretaker comes online shortly after the duckling comes into the world. Unfortunately, however, the mother the duckling meets in those first few moments may not be adequate to the task of taking care of it. Nonetheless, although those in the outer world may not live up to the instinctual expectation, they may not even be ducks. The archetype for caretaker forms the duckling's behavior. In a similar way, human beings are wired for mother and father and many other human relationships, as well as all forms of the human experience of the world. And though those in the outer world may not live up to the archetypal expectation, the archetype is nonetheless present. It is constant and universal in all of us. We, like the duckling that mistakes a cat for its mother, mistake our actual parents for the ideal patterns and potentials within us. These blueprints appear to be great in number, and they manifest themselves as both male and female. There are archetypes that pattern the thoughts and feelings and relationships of women, and there are archetypes that pattern the thoughts and feelings and relationships of men. In addition, Jungians have found that in every man, there is a feminine subpersonality called the anima, made up of female archetypes. And in every woman, there is a masculine subpersonality called the animus, made up of the masculine archetypes. All human beings can access the archetypes to a greater or lesser degree. We do this, in fact, in our interrelating with one another.
Maybe one of the most shocking of all Buddhist stories is the one I shared earlier in our meditation. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, the Zen master says. Now, Zen has a tendency to be a bit critical of pious thinking. It wants to shock us out of our normal perceptions of the world to see things in a new light, a more authentic way. But almost always, there's a lesson behind the madness. If you see the Buddha out there walking around like a regular guy, well, he's got to be an imposter. If you think the Buddha is that statue you're praying to back there, think again. If you think Buddha is any external, concrete, finite object in your experience, you are wrong. Kill it. Kill the idea of the ultimate sacred reality as a person of exalted fame. The Buddha lives in only one place, inside you. At the heart of Zen, and really much of Mahayana Buddhism in general, is this notion of Buddha nature. Now, Buddha nature is a kind of complex theological belief, but essentially it is a teaching that says that we are all interconnected. What happens to everyone out there in the world will, in some way, however minutely, affect me. Its ripples will come to my shores. This includes not only the actions of living beings now, but also those who have gone before us. The legacy of the past affects the present. The vision of the framers of the Constitution, for example, how that vision affects how we run our government today. A little bit of that vision still lives on in those who work and function in our democracy. Therefore, the argument goes, since one fellow, Siddhartha Gautama in 500 BC, since he attained enlightenment, there is a little piece of that enlightened being in all of us. A little glimmer of that enlightened mind stirs within our being somehow. Granted, it's hard to see at times, but there is that shard of the holy in each and every one of us without exception. We're all potential Buddhas in the making. One day, we may even fulfill that potential and become enlightened ourselves. Now, if some of this sounds familiar, you aren't the first one to notice. This sounds an awful lot like our first principle of Unitarian Universalism, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That's a tightly worded sentence that manages to include both Unitarian denial of original sin and the Universalist belief that all people are saved. All that in only 8 words. Which I think raises something of an important question. What are the principles anyway? What exactly is the purpose and function of these 7, soon to be 8 sentences? Well, first, it's important to note what they are not. They're not creedal statements. One will not get kicked out of the UUA or a UU church for disagreeing with them. Indeed, I think disagreeing with the principles can be fruitful. Wrestling with these statements is part of the point. Thich Nhat Hanh would say that the principles are mindfulness bells. That is to say, statements that are meant to draw our attention to a specific area or topic. These are the things that are important to our faith. We identify with these ethical and theological principles as both an end and a means for living in the world. Sometimes disagreeing with a principle is a good way to engage it, chew on it a bit, reflect on the implications for your life, the life of the church, the life of our nation, the life of our planet. The principles are not just PR statements to help us market Unitarian Universalism. They're areas worthy of our spiritual reflection, discernment, and action in the world. Well, we've been talking and we'll be talking about the potential for an 8th principle this year, but let's take that out of the equation for the moment and think just about that first principle. First principle about the inherent worth and dignity of every person is as sacred a cow in Unitarian Universalism as we may ever have. It expresses our theology, both past and present. What does it mean for every person to have inherent worth and dignity? What does it mean to be so bold as to proclaim, as the Zen Buddhists and many others do, that all of us have the potential to be a Buddha? Potential. That's a key understanding that the Zen Buddhists bring to the table. It's not to say that we are all Buddhas right now, here today, though it could be argued that maybe a Buddha might disguise themselves as a regular person, so you couldn't know the difference. But putting aside that for a moment, we may not all be Buddhas now, but we might become one down the road. The spiritual path is not instantaneous. Awakening can seem sudden, but really take months, years, maybe lifetimes of practice to cultivate. There's a difference between turning down the right path toward our destination and actually arriving there. Perhaps the best metaphor for this aspect of the spiritual journey is none other than L. Frank Baum's novels and eventual film, The Wizard of Oz. Like many of you, I'm sure The Wizard of Oz is near and dear to my heart. Back in the days before the internet streaming and DVDs and heck, even VHS cassettes, if you can believe it, I watched The Wizard of Oz on broadcast television. Periodically throughout the year, my father's side of the family would get together for various birthdays and holidays and family events. My dad's the youngest of four brothers, and two of his brothers got married and had kids. So I grew up pretty close to my cousins, who were pretty close to me in age. And one of the best ways to keep that many kids quiet back in the early 80s was to put on The Wizard of Oz. We were enwrapped. And so for me, the movie, and especially the music, evokes pleasant memories with my family, running around with my cousins, having a grand time. So I find it interesting that the film has been the subject of so much psychological and theological reflection. Joseph Campbell, that titan that introduced the mythologies of the world to so many of us, points out that The Wizard of Oz is one of the few stories of the hero's journey in which the hero is female. That is to say, Dorothy follows all of the stages of classic hero myths like Gilgamesh and Odysseus, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Buddha, Luke Skywalker, Tony Stark, Harry Potter, and Frodo Baggins. All of them take a journey, encounter obstacles, learn something about themselves, and then return home, changed and transformed. In our video today, we see that moment when Dorothy formally begins her hero's journey. She needs something, a way home. She has numerous obstacles in her way, most notably the Wicked Witch of the West. I did have half a mind to show the scene just before this clip. I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too. Mostly just because that's such an iconic line, perfectly delivered by the brilliant Margaret Hamilton. So our hero has a challenge in her way, but keeping her going is that vision to get to the Emerald City, to see the wizard, and ultimately to get back to Kansas. Kansas is like the promised land, the pure land of Sukhavati in Buddhism, heaven in Christianity. It's the place we're all trying to get to. The irony, of course, is that at the beginning of the movie, when Dorothy was literally in her farm in Kansas, she kept dreaming about somewhere over the rainbow. But when she gets to Oz and finds herself there, all she wants is to get back home. And not just to be home, but to be home after being transformed. There are two things that are important to note about Dorothy's particular hero's journey. The first is that there is a difference between starting out on the Yellow Brick Road and actually arriving at the Emerald City. To start off on the Yellow Brick Road means you have a vision. You want to arrive at that land where troubles melt like lemon drops, or whatever compelling vision you've placed before yourself. Starting out doing meditation is a long way from actually being enlightened, as nearly anyone who's ever tried it will tell you. That initial turn, that first articulation of who you want to be, who we want to be as a church, is crucial. You will never arrive at your vision if you don't first articulate it very clearly. You have to want to go to the Emerald City, to know a little bit about the Emerald City, what it is, before you can really set off on the Yellow Brick Road. Carl Jung would tell us that Dorothy's journey is really our journey. We resonate with that book, that book or the musical or the movie, because it's part of our shared collective consciousness known as an archetype. Bob Moore, who actually was one of my professors, taught us about these in our reading this morning. We as a Unitarian Universalist Church are on a similar journey. We start off on our own Yellow Brick Road, headed toward a new vision of what our church could be. What are we going to become? We need to articulate that vision. Our church, like so many others, are blessed to be able to do this at least once a year. Every year, we have the chance to articulate our vision for the coming year to the members and friends who join us. we get to describe what the Emerald City looks like for us next year. For you see, a budget may look like a bunch of boring numbers and graphs on a spreadsheet, but oh no, it is actually a Buddha in disguise. What a budget really is a vision of what we care about as a congregation. It's a document that describes our values and wishes. It says, these are the things we want to see happen next year. Or perhaps there are contingencies in a budget. This is how we want to prevent the bad things from happening to us next year. Flying monkey insurance, that sort of thing. I think a good budget has to be both effective and efficient. Stephen Covey came up with this distinction, and I've found it to be a good one. Anyone can be efficient. We can do all the parts of church well: social justice, pastoral care, religious education, worship, etc. Which raises the question, are we doing things right, or are we doing the right things? In other words, do all those functions add up to mean we're accomplishing the mission of the church? Are we effective as well as efficient? If we think strategically, I think they do. The mission of the church is like the Emerald City. Our budget is the yellow brick road. Having a compelling vision is great, but that doesn't mean you're there yet. Funding that vision is what gets us down the road toward the goals we dream of having. Of course, one of the lessons, this is the second part that I mentioned, one of the lessons of the movie is that the Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz are not all they are cracked up to be. You have to adapt when you arrive at your vision sometimes. If it wasn't what you expected. She has to use the gifts she learned. And in the ultimate twist of the movie, we learn that the ruby slippers that Dorothy's been wearing the entire time could have taken her home. She was carrying the answer the whole time. She had the potential to get there at any point. The ruby slippers are her Buddha nature, her potential to achieve what she's dreamed of. The Buddhist text, the Lotus Sutra, actually makes a similar point. We're like Buddhas who have amnesia, it says. We're Buddhas, but we've forgotten we're Buddhas. We need to be reminded. Metaphor is that we're like a rich prince who has had an accident and forgets who he is. He assumes he's a pauper in the streets and begins to beg. Only later does he discover in the lining of his jacket a precious jewel that has been there the whole time. He's able to sell and get food. And it is just so for us. We have the potential to make all of our wishes and dreams in our budget come to life next year. There's an old joke about church fundraising. One Sunday, the minister gets up to give a sermon, much like this one, I suppose, in fact, that's intended to increase giving in the church. And he says, well, I've got good news and bad news. Good news is that we have all the money to do everything we want to do in our congregation next year. Bad news is that money's still in everyone's pockets. Like Dorothy and her ruby slippers, we have the potential to be anything we want to be next year. We have it within our grasp to do it. All we need is some people who are willing to make that vision come to life. All we need to do is to fund that vision, that budget that our board has put before us. It's that simple. The first principle says that we all have inherent worth and dignity. We're all Buddhas in waiting. We all have the ruby slippers on. We just don't know how to tap our heels together. We have a vision of what the Unitarian Universalist congregation of the Hudson Valley could be and should be next year. Now all we need to do is fund that mission so that it can joyfully come to life. This year's budget has so much to be excited about. There is funding for our staff. There's investment in our children. There is the transformation of our church and our community through the social justice work and the Eighth Principle Task Force. There are ways to connect to other Unitarian Universalists in our community in there. There's the preservation and maintenance of our building. Indeed, that may be the most important piece of all in its own way. I cannot guarantee anything or give specific timelines, but it's likely that we'll be meeting in our building next year for worship and for other meetings. We'll have the chance to welcome actual people into our building again. That that simple yet profound practice of radical hospitality will be there for us when all of the pandemic insanity is over. Let us be ready to welcome each other and the stranger when that happens. It is a unique opportunity for us, which we will be able to seize when we fully fund our dreams. May we join together in a crazy, awesome, glorious band of wanderers down the yellow brick road. One thing that the movie teaches us is that if we are to get to the Emerald City, we have to get there together. No one rolls in under their own power. The accomplishment of arriving there, just like the accomplishment of attaining the ultimate enlightenment of all the Buddhas, is something so precious that it affects all of us. We all participate in that victory. So too, let us give generously towards our own vision of our mission made real in this world. For if we do, you will have so many things to sing about. I love you. Thank you in advance for your generosity. Go in peace. Amen. I invite you now to join in singing hymn number 1028, Fire of Commitment. The words will appear on your screen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Oliver. Terry and I have been members of the congregation for over 20 years. I currently chair the Buildings and Grounds Committee. When asked if I would share my thoughts about why the congregation is important for me, my initial response was to decline. But before I could think about it, the words, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it," jumped out. I suppose I reacted from my heart before my brain could talk me out of it. The heart said yes because for all the complaining and moaning I sometimes do about cutting the lawn, dealing with our old building, the list of things that have to be done before we can be there in person again, in the end, I really care about this place. Sunday worship, the community, the work it does, and RE for our children are all important, as are our Unitarian values in trying to make the world better. We initially joined the congregation for the kids. Terry and I were brought up with different faiths. While we no longer practiced, we wanted to give our children the structure that comes with this sort of commitment. It began as a compromise between our Christian and Jewish upbringings. It seemed to be the right thing, and it was a very welcoming community. What I didn't realize was how much I would enjoy it myself. Then, as now, we were blessed with a terrific minister. Our family established a regular pattern of Sunday attendance, centering and taking a breath to face the week ahead. Our kids were young. We both had demanding and stressful corporate jobs. Our little fellowship was like an island to retreat to every Sunday. We made new friends. It was great. And unlike the church I grew up in, we got our summers off. So a place for our children and us to go on a weekly basis got us started. We got involved with religious education. Through the years, we taught on Sundays. Both of our kids went through OWL. We've been mentors for youth in coming of age. We've participated in midnight runs with our own and later with other children. I was so proud of my son when we went to the city for his first run to see how at ease he was in speaking with and distributing food and clothing to the homeless. And I got as much out of it as he did. Teaching, mentoring our youth, and participating in these activities was a tremendous growth experience for me. I look at today's young families here, bringing their children in as we did, and it's a reminder of how important the guidance the fellowship offers to our children is. And the big part of the place is worship and Sundays. I love a good sermon, not so much the ones I grew up with in traditional church. Those were long, boring sermons about God, Jesus, the Bible, sin, and salvation. But after coming here for the first time, I wanted to return the following week, something I'd never felt about going to church when growing up. Our first minister was Jim Covington, who had a true gift. We lucked out. His sermons kept us coming back. Since Jim's retirement, we've had a series of ministers who have all brought something positive to the discussion. Sometimes the discussion is provocative, and that's okay. It's okay to stretch and be uncomfortable. This is a community of thinkers, and this is how the world moves forward. The common thread throughout is that the sermons reflect upon making the world we live in right now a better place, not the salvation promised in the next world. Social justice, the environment, current events, how we conduct our lives, in short, our principles. These things matter now for us, for the planet, and for our children. We're approaching 1 year of Zoom services. Personally, I feel fortunate that we've emerged from this year's ministerial crisis and pandemic with Reverend Josh. He brings his own unique style and consistently has delivered on Sundays in the best tradition of our Unitarian faith. His sermons have been inspiring. They've challenged me to think. They've challenged me to be better. And despite the difficult times we live in, they've never failed to bring a smile and maybe a laugh or two every Sunday. Reverend Josh, he's currently the best show on Zoom. Just think how good he's going to be live when we have services in the building again. Finally, I value this community and its work. I have 20 years of examples, but I've only got 5 minutes, so here's a recent one. In the past 6 months, my two biggest social gatherings were our fall cleanup and our January parking lot gathering around the fire pit. The cleanup was hard work. The January gathering was cold, but it was great to see everybody. It reminded me again how much I enjoy this congregation. Being in community with others who are socially conscious, care about the environment, share my values and many of my views on the world is important to me. It's a community that works to help immigrants, works for environmental causes, feeds the homeless, pushes back against racism. This is a smart group of resourceful people whose company I've enjoyed at services, coffee hours, cleanups, pledges, social events, volunteer work, and other get-togethers. There are so many I've known who have passed through the congregation over our time here. They've either moved on, left the community, or sadly, they're no longer with us. We've worshiped, walked, talked, cried, and laughed together. There's a legacy, over 60 years of history here. It predates us and will continue after we've moved on. Decades of working to make the world better and in trying to spread our Unitarian values. I'm proud to be part of this amazing community and hope that our fellowship continues to be a spiritual home for like-minded people working to improve the world long after we've moved on. There's light at the end of the COVID tunnel today. I'm very optimistic about our future and look forward to seeing you all in person sooner than later in our fellowship hall. Thank you.
And now may we go forth as partners and friends, reunited to seek the truth and freedom, to do good to our fellow human beings, and to be at peace with ourselves. May we take with us the certainty of faith, the knowledge of love, and the vision of hope. Amen.